Good morning. Happy Thursday. This Thursday, right, everyone? Michelle Couchette here. I am here with our next installment. I believe this is the fourth conversation about a faith that will not fail. Today I have, hold on really quick. I am adding my friend here. Nope. She just always takes me a while to do this. There we go. Have Holley Gerth with us. Love her. Just beautiful heart, beautiful writer. She writes a lot about anxiety, about introverts. There she is, the introvert herself that I'm making on Instagram Live. Look at that.
Yes, out of my comfort zone this morning. I've had my coffee, so.
Good for you. Well, the secret that most people don't realize about me is I'm not a true extrovert. I'm really right in the middle. I actually love being alone, believe it or not. So I fake it. So we can both be faking it today.
There you go. And take a nap afterward, maybe.
Yeah. So Holley is here today. We're talking about a faith that will not fail. I want to take the unique angle with what her expertise is. She has a beautiful blog, by the way. I subscribe to her emails, highly recommend doing that. But the post that I love coming through is where she's talking about, obviously, introversion, but also anxiety, dealing with that, what that looks like, how we tackle that, which is such a great tie-in with a faith that will not fail, because there's a lot to be anxious about in this life, and it often we find some of that tension in walking out our real faith in the middle of real life. So these conversations are all about moving from faith in theory to what faith really looks like as we're walking through the complexities of real life. So welcome, Holley. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Is that your kitchen? It's lovely, by the way.
It is. It is my actual kitchen. So
Okay.
yes, just had breakfast in here, and yeah.
Does it always look like that, or did you clean it up just for this?
No, it looks like that most of the time. I might have a little bit of a compulsive issue about clean counters. So.
I'm kind of,
yes. Yeah.
okay. Okay.
Sometimes I need to just shove everything into the sink, but yeah, that also works. Or in the oven, and then I find it later and remember, oh yeah, that's right, I put that in there.
Shoving it in the oven. That's actually, I've put things in the dishwasher before, like just dropped a bunch of stuff in the dishwasher. I haven't tried the oven yet, but I need to, because obviously, right?
Oven, microwave, anything with the door.
It's like a great. Okay, so we have a ton of people joining. By the way, I see you guys joining: Samantha, Elena. I see so many of you, Greta. So let's go ahead and dive in. And I want you, if you are willing, as much as you're willing to share, kind of your coming to faith journey. So what your faith has looked like up until this moment, as brief as you can, so then we can really start digging into the practical.
Yeah. Well, I've always felt like I had maybe like a boring faith story, because I was born into a Christian family. My grandparents had a Christian bookstore. That's actually how I started dreaming of being a writer. And so that's what I ended up pursuing. And Jesus has just always felt like a friend. And so my faith has just been a thread that's been present throughout my life. But as we'll talk about, every relationship has had its hard times, and I've had that in my walk with God too.
Yeah, and that's so encouraging for us to hear, because we see, you and we talked to Jennifer Duxley on Tuesday, and she also has been, faith has been a part of her story from the very beginning, because she too was raised in a Christian family. So there's this appearance that everything is just going along perfectly for you, for her, for others like us that have been in faith for a long time. And so as much as you're able, pull back the curtain just a little bit and give us some examples of times in your life where you've really felt the tension or the challenge of real life impacting how you walk out your faith.
Yeah. So the time that came to mind was my husband and I went through about a decade of infertility. And that's a long time to pray and not have your prayers answered. And so I thought about it, and I thought, did I have a crisis of faith where I thought, do I believe in God? And my crisis of faith was, does God believe in me?
Ah,
You
yes.
know, like I still believe God's out there. You know, it wasn't that. It was, does he believe in me? Does he think something's wrong with me? Am I failing him somehow? Like, is his love real, or do I have to perform? Like, those are the faith questions I've wrestled with. Not does God exist, but does he really love me the way he says that he does?
I think that's a really excellent point, that a crisis of faith does not always mean that we don't believe that there is a God. A crisis of faith can be simply theology that we've been following up to now, that we all of a sudden go, wait, what if that is not accurate? Or like you said, does God believe in me? I think I talked about this yesterday. I did an interview with Janet Purcell on her radio program, and we talked about how when we are going through some kind of crisis, whatever it may be, infertility for you, me, it's been things with kids and cancer and divorce, remarriage, we need that point a finger at something that's responsible for our pain.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only a few places we can point. So it ends up being usually God. We blame him for it, or ourselves. And that's what
Yeah.
I default. I go, well, I must have not prayed hard enough. Maybe I should fast more. Maybe I haven't memorized enough scripture. Maybe I did something wrong in my past that I'm being punished for now. I've talked to other people with infertility challenges, and it's very common for them to say, well, I made mistakes in my sexuality in high school or college or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
punished for that, or other things
Yeah.
similar to that. And how did you work through that?
Well, the first thing I did was we eventually shared it with our small group. I've been raised kind of like, oh, to be a good Christian, you have to be fine all the time. You just need to keep a smile on your face. And I remember this night we were at our small group, and I just thought, I can't do this anymore. Like, I am not okay. I can't sit here and pretend like I am. And I told them, like, I just had a miscarriage. And I remember sitting there kind of like stiffening, like waiting to hear that, well, you just need to have more faith, or something must be wrong with you. And instead, they just literally like came around us and put their arms around us and prayed for us. And several of the women said, me too. Like, I've been through this too. And I had no idea. And these people were like family to us then. And so that was really a turning point, not just in my journey with infertility, but just in letting people into the hard places
Yeah.
of my faith, where I wasn't able to just say, yeah, everything's fine, it's good. Where I was able to say, I'm not okay. And not only that, I don't know how I'm going to get back to being okay. Like, I can't even tell you I'm going to be okay at some point in the future. Like, this is where I am.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, I was with a group of people who said, we'll
Yes.
be there with you. And so that was really a turning point, I think, in my story.
That is so powerful. Back in the faith that will not fail. One of the connection and community, because we can't do it alone. Like our
Mm-mm.
and 10 years, Holley, 10 years is such a long time. I mean, it's just kind of mind blowing to me. That's a lot of months of disappointment, right?
Yeah.
Um, I, I had a miscarriage myself, and before I was a mom for the first time, went through a miscarriage. When I got pregnant after that, I remember somebody coming up to me and saying, "Try not to lose this one." That
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It was an extended family member who said that, and it was an example of what community shouldn't look like.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think the key thing is those things are going to happen. Sometimes people fail us in community, and that's an example of an unintentional failure. But we can't cut ourselves off from community. Otherwise, we're actually short-circuiting our own healing and even our own faith growth in those hard seasons. And so you were brave enough to take that risk.
Yeah. And I had people say things that were unhelpful. Like, I remember one family member said, well, you're working full time and going to grad school. And I heard on Dr. Phil that stress causes infertility. So I'm sure if you quit your job and dropped out of grad school, then you would get pregnant, And so I experienced both ends of the spectrum, like this really beautiful moment, and then some moments where it's just like, really? And I had to kind of just learn to say, okay, this person is trying to communicate that they care about me and they want me to feel better. They're just using the absolute wrong words, and they're not reflecting God's heart toward me right now. So I think we experienced
There
both.
basically doing what I mentioned earlier is when they're suffering, we definitely want to explain it somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's often where we trip up and make mistakes. We try too hard to explain rather than just be present to it, right?
Yes.
And so
Mm-hmm.
very way trying to explain what's happening rather than just offering you comfort. So let's talk about, since you have talked about community being a big piece of helping you push through and get more grounded in your faith in a hard season, give me some just real practical tips, I guess you could say, or insights, and what are the most helpful things from a community standpoint. So if, let's say there's a person right here with us, a third person on this conversation that's going through a hard time, what would you recommend that's truly helpful to build up their faith when they're struggling? So let's say they're really struggling with understanding God or even believing that he believes in them.
Yeah.
How do you help them in that place? How much do you say or not say?
I would say the first step is letting yourself be okay with not being okay. Because until we can give ourselves permission to actually feel what we feel, whether it's grief or anger or doubt or frustration, or is God really there? Does God really love me? Then we're not able to share that with someone else. And so I think that is the first step, to saying, whatever I feel, I have permission to feel it. And then who's one safe person that I can share that with? And it may be a close friend or a family member. It may be a counselor. There's been seasons of my life when a counselor has been the safe person that I needed to go to and say, I'm really struggling with something right now. I feel stuck. I need help. And so having at least one person, and then recognizing that I think doubt is often embedded in grief. You know, there's something in our life that is not going the way we hoped or expected or dreamed. And so also recognizing, like, yes, I'm struggling with faith, but I'm probably also really struggling with grief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, C.S. Lewis said, and I'm going to paraphrase, I won't get the quote exactly right, but no one told me that grief felt so like fear.
Yes.
And often, and fear and the doubt kind of go together, right? Fear is this kind of unknown. We don't know how to explain or understand something. And I thought that was so powerful. I think it was in his book, A Grief Observed. I think that's where I read it. But this idea of, I didn't know that grief felt so like fear, that often grief, or often underneath some of the more complicated emotions like anger and fear, overwhelm, you know, despair, whatever, underneath that is a pretty significant grief that we acknowledge. And that, you know, in A Faith That Will Not Fail, I talk about the practice of lament.
Yes.
As Christians, many times, or people who want to follow God, feel like we can't give voice to our grief. Speak to that in your own experience of lament, because you mentioned that a little bit about being okay with whatever you feel.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to be able to say to God, like, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm disappointed, I'm hurt. Like, he's not surprised by it. He already knows anyway. And I love that about the Psalms, that the psalmist is often like, hey, where are you? What is going on? I don't understand. And yet, and yet, and that's the place we get to, I think, by going through the grief. I think so many times, and I did this for so long, we try to go around grief.
Mm-hmm.
Especially as believers, we're like, I have to find a way around this thing. And I think that we serve a God who knows we're going to need to go through it. And that's going to be hard and messy and slower than we want it to, and hurt more than we'd like. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with our faith. It doesn't mean we're failing. It means we are humans who are grieving and are fighting a hard battle. And so I think when we can realize that it's really a lot about grief, we can be more gentle with ourselves and realize that God is gentle with us in those moments too, that he's not harsh saying, what are you doing? You're so blessed. Like, get over this. Instead, he's saying, like, yeah, things are not the way, this is not the way it's supposed to be. This is not what you were created for. And I know what it's like to live on earth, and you have permission to feel whatever you feel and to have doubts and wrestle and shed those tears and even get angry, that he's in all of that with us.
Yes. Yeah, as you were talking in my head of the Israelites crossing the Red Sea, that they're in this place of crisis, and the only way isn't going around it, going through, right? They had to go
Mm-hmm.
the Red Sea. They had to go through the thing that was so terrifying and scary to get to their promised land on the other side. Um, and uh, and that's, like you said, terrifying. Same with Joshua and the Israelites. They had to go through the Jordan running at flood stage, and that was scary. And but what they had to remember and what God showed them is that He was with them in it. And that's a hard tension, because we do want to go around. We don't want to have to deal with that hard thing, but He is with us in it. Somebody asked in the chat the name of the C.S. Lewis book, to repeat it. It's called A Grief Observed. It's when he lost his wife. It's a very raw book. I read it during one of my darkest times, and to me, it was complex, but it also, because he was so raw about his experience of losing his wife, I felt comfort in my own suffering. Like, he didn't try to gloss over the reality of pain. So it's called A Grief Observed. So, any other practical tips that you have, Holley, for people who are in a place right now where they're wrestling with fear and grief? That idea of an unsettled spirit, the anxiety of not knowing how things are going to end up, right? We live in a place of the unknown. One of the practices in a faith that will not fail is the practice of waiting and sitting in that place. But often when we're in that waiting place, we're dealing with all kinds of fear and overwhelm and anxiety and all that. What kind of tips do you have for the people who are here today for how to navigate that while still staying grounded in what you believe, the goodness of God?
Yeah, one of the most helpful things for me in seasons like this has been permission to go small, because I think when we're in a big crisis, we want a big solution,
Mm-hmm.
or we have big expectations for ourselves. I have to figure this all out. I have to come up with a master plan. I have to do all these things perfectly. And I think that saying, okay, it's all right if I just take the next small step.
Mm-hmm.
So on any given day in my journey with infertility, that step might be choosing to get out of bed in the morning. It might be choosing to send a one-line text to a friend. It's a really hard day. Can you please pray?
Mm-hmm.
It might be saying a one-line prayer. Jesus, help. I don't like this.
Mm-hmm.
Sitting at my computer and doing just the next small thing. And so I would say, in seasons of grief and doubt, and when you're really wrestling, lower your expectations
Yes.
and say, what's the next small step? And then take the next small step. And over time, that will be enough. Release the big, heavy things that feel like you have to figure out all at once, or that you have to do, or all of those things. If something feels heavy in this season, it's okay to set it down, because you're already doing the hard work of wrestling through doubt, of wrestling through grief, of processing whatever it is that has brought you to this place. And so that is one thing that I find myself going back to. I've had to do it again recently.
Yes.
To be like, all right, micro goals, small things,
Yes.
one small step at a time. So that's a practice that has been helpful to me.
I think we underestimate the physical toll grief or suffering or some kind of crisis takes on us physically. We don't fully recognize or appreciate that. I'm thinking of, as you were talking, I was thinking of the story of Elijah after he's been doing these big works for God, right? He's doing these great miracles, and he's facing down King Ahab and Jezebel and all of that. And he runs and gets to a place. They put a price on his head, basically. They're going to kill him. And so he takes off running for his life and ends up by a river under a bush or whatever. And he's like, basically said, I don't want to live. I wish I was never born. And so he was getting to that place where he despaired of life and was at his end. And this is a big miracle working, powerful, talk about having a big platform. Like, he was doing big things for God, and he reached the end of himself. I love that story, not so much for Elijah reaching the end of himself, but the way that God responded. He responded by saying, the journey is too much for you. Mm-hmm. In other words, God validated that sometimes the situations we are in are too much for us.
Yeah. And he sends like angels with snacks and tells Elijah to take a nap. So I'm like, God is like, you need a nap and a snack.
Yeah.
Like, and I find so often that's what we need to, like, we feel like I have to have this big spiritual solution to all this doubt or all this, and sometimes what we need is a nap and a snack.
Yep.
And
I
then try
and
again,
try. I have I have fully embraced the spiritual napping. So you all,
Yes.
and that's one of the losses after going through cancer 3 times, but also one of the gains, because I literally cannot function without having at least a nap a day. I mean, this is my physical reality, and I spent a long time feeling guilty about that. I'm just now starting to realize that's part of my spiritual practice of faith, is resting.
Yeah.
I neglect that. It impacts my outlook, my mindset, my heart, the narrative that's going in my head, all of it. So one way, this is not very profound, is it? One way that I have a faith that will not fail is sleep. I mean, let's just
Yeah, me too.
works.
Yes, same. Almost every day I take a nap, like if I possibly can. Yeah. And my husband and my best friend both, if I'm like, woo, in the crazy place, they both will be like, how about you take a nap? My husband will even say, I'll take you in. So, yeah.
I'm a big believer. So for those of you that have joined us here, this is us giving you permission that you don't need to go out there and do a 4-hour Bible study or memorize the entire book of Leviticus, although Bible study, maybe all you need today is take a nap. One thing I've also been doing as I go to sleep is picturing myself literally resting.
That's good.
Psalm 91:1, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. And so I picture myself resting in the shadow of the Almighty. And there's something about that's so calming, so securing. And then I wake up, hour, maybe 2 later, a new woman.
Yes, I love that. Yes, the spiritual practice of napping. I like it. Jesus said that, right? He napped on boats. He napped all over the place. So,
for crying out loud. Well, Holley, this has been so rich. I know I kept you a little longer than what I had planned on, but so rich. And for everybody that joined, I pray a sweet little nap for you today if you need it. But make sure you check out Holley's website, holleygerth.com. You can have access to her resources there. And then again, today we talked about it will not fail, and we talked about the practice of connection, community, the practice of waiting, and we talked about the practice of lament as well. And the biggest takeaway from this conversation, Holley, for me, is just your encouragement to go small. That is okay to not, stand on the mountaintop doing big miracles in order to have a strong faith. It's sometimes just the small practices, the small efforts, the going smaller are the things that help us get grounded for whatever we're dealing with now or whatever is to come.
Yeah. Thank you. And congrats on your book. It is a great resource. So I hope everyone will get it for themselves. And also, if you have someone in your life who's struggling, get a copy too. Because sometimes we need someone else to say what we don't know how to say. And this is a great book for that. So get one for you and share.
Thank you, Holley. So appreciate you. Love you dearly.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye.